All right, and we are now a little bit into the 10th chapter. Okay, chapter 10, verse number 4. And what we've had over the past couple of weeks is one idea that's stretched across the past couple of verses and actually crossed chapters, as we've said many times now, that the chapters are not actually in the book. The chapters are a later invention by Christian monks. So they don't necessarily line up with the concepts, not conceptual chapters, in so much as that they are just useful markers that we use. So what we had was this idea kind of crossing from chapter 9 into chapter 10. And the general idea being that wisdom is unfortunately able to be undone by another powerful force. That powerful force we're referring to as cynicism. Okay, with the force of cynicism, a person can undo the constructive power of wisdom and instead unleash a destructive power. The sages, I think I might have mentioned this in the past. The sages say that one word of joking can undo 1,000 hours of introspection. Which is, I mean, that's pretty heavy, but it is kind of true. It is true. That you have to be very careful with how you express things and put things the right way. Again, not that humor itself is wrong. Humor can be very useful. In fact, the sages themselves talk about the use that humor has. But so again, humor is not the issue. The issue is more this cynical, nothing's important. Everything is a joke, and that's really where the danger shows up. So that's what we've been having for the past couple of weeks. And the thought is going to be completed this week, but is also going to segue well into the next idea. So it's going to be a both the end of one thing, but also a good bridge into the next concept. Okay, so without any further ado, let's jump into the screen share. Okay. Give me a second over here. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that now. Looks like it took a second. All right.
Yeah, I can see it.
Okay, good. Thank you. All right, so here we have verse number 4. So again, this is chapter 10, verse number 4, or Yud, Parak Yud, Pasuk Dalid. And this is a very interesting verse. It took me a long time to figure out how to read this verse. I literally spent probably about 40 minutes trying to figure out how to read the verse and what it's trying to say. And I'll explain that as we go through. And I looked at a bunch of different translations, and they all kind of gave a different idea, but some of them generally gave us, there's a general idea that they all agreed to. But here, I'll explain as we go along. Let's read the verse word for word. Imruach hamoshel ta'ale alecha. If the power, or if the force, or if the wind, literally, ruach is wind, if the wind of the powerful one, of the controller, comes up against you, mikomacha al tanach, do not leave your place, literally, or not literally. We'll take a second on that one. Ki marpeh, because marpeh, yaniach chataim gedolim, will settle great sins. Okay, so let's read that one more time. Just get the words out, and we'll take it piece by piece. If the wind of the powerful one, of the controller, comes up against you, mikomacha al tanach, do not literally rest your place. Ki marpeh, because the healing, yaniach chataim gedolim, will settle great sins. Okay, so there's again, yeah, that sounds pretty biblical, but I don't know what that means, right? It doesn't. The words are very strange, and what they have to do with what we're talking about. So let's take this piece by piece over here. The first thing that stands out to me is this word Tanakh. Okay, this is not Tanakh as in the Torah, Nevi'im, Kesuvim, the 24 books of the Jewish Bible. Right? This is spelled differently. That would be with a chaf. This is with a chet. Okay, so that's not the Tanakh we're referring to over here. But it says, Mekomcha, your place, al Tanakh, should not be settled. Okay. The word there is nach, is to settle. Okay. So nach, nun chet, means for something to rest in its place. Okay. Hanacha is something that is when you place something down, or as the noun verb, it's something that you can assume. Okay. You can just presume that something is true because it's a hanacha, it's already there in its place. It already occupies its place. So that's an interesting word to put over here, because that would indicate that the word means your place you shall not settle. Okay. But again, looking at all the commentaries, I found a very different sense. All the commentaries and all the translations learn the word Tanakh as leave. Don't leave your place. So if the power of the controller comes against you, don't leave your place. Don't leave your post, your position. That's what a lot of them seem to indicate, which I think is not incorrect. I think that is kind of what it's saying. I mean, just in context, that seems to be what it should be saying, right? Your place you should not leave. But then it's interesting because 3 words later, we have the same shorish, the same root shows up again. Because marpeh, whatever that is yaniach chata'im gedolim. It also settles these great sins. Okay, so again, what are these the same word? In the shoresh, in the Hebrew root word, it's the same word. Okay, Tanakh and Yaniach, it's the same word. For example, we also have Noah, meaning the guy who survived the flood. His name also is the same thing, same root word over there. So we have again this kind of word showing up over here. So that's just question number 1: is what is that word and why is it showing up twice in this verse and seemingly in 2 different ways? Okay. The second piece that needs to get answered is what is this word marpeh? Now, when I translated the verse originally, I said healing. That does seem to be what it's. Rafa means resh pei aleph, generally means healing. Okay, so a rofei is a doctor. Refuah, like we say refuah shalema, person should have a full healing, should be completely healed, should feel better. In other words, that's our go-to. That's our phrase for saying you should feel better. So that's usually what marpeh means. I saw a number of the commentaries want to say that the marpeh over here actually is more as though it was written with a hey at the end. And then the shoresh, the root, would be resh pei hey, which would mean to weaken, to let go, to let go. Rifayon means something that is weak, or it's used also in Tanakh in a number of places to refer to just letting go of something, to release something. So there's a difference of opinion about what this marpeh is. Is it healing or is it releasing? I saw one of the translations said that ki marpeh, that when a person gives in to those in power, it avoids yaniach chatem gedolim. It avoids a lot of problems. So if you give in to the power, then it avoids a lot of problems, which would be a total discrepancy from the first half of the verse, which is don't leave your post. When they come against you, don't leave your post. But if you do it, you'll avoid a lot of problems. That's a very strange thing to say. And again, what's the point? What's the context? What are we trying to say over here? The last thing is again this word over here that I translated as ruach, or ruach we translated as wind. That's what it literally means. Ruach is wind or air, not really air. It's more like a blowing wind. Okay. It's also used for spirit. Ruach. We find the ruchot are also the spirits, meaning spirit inside of us. There's a difference in Jewish philosophy between the ruach and the neshama. I don't know exactly what that difference is, but if you ever heard of the neshama, meaning the spirit, the soul, there's a difference between the spirit and the soul. Okay, so the ruach would be the spirit, the neshama would be the soul. What's the difference? ask somebody a little more knowledgeable about these matters than me. There one is just the life force, perhaps one's the spiritual force. Again, I don't know enough about that stuff to say for sure. But regardless, it's interesting to be used over here that we're saying Ruach HaMoshel Taleh Alecha if the wind of the controller comes up against you. Strange word. Why not? Why not the I don't know. I can think of any number of things. If the power of the powerful come out against you, right? If the control of the controller comes against you, I don't know. There's all sorts of other words that we could possibly use. It's interesting that he chooses the word ruach, which again, in its essence, means wind. Again, like a blowing air, wind. Okay, so if this wind of this controller comes up against you, then do not nach your place, because something, probably healing, will again nach great sins. So you can now see why it took me a long time to figure out what's going on in this verse over here. There's a lot of questions that just kind of face you right off the bat. And again, I can't find any consistency in any of the translations that I looked for, except for one thing. Almost everyone said, "Don't leave your place." Makom chal tanach is don't leave your post. Okay, fine. Those are the questions. If we go back to, then it's kind of hit me. We had a Moshel just recently, right? And again, because I get sucked into this mistake also of the chapters, the chapters again they're not really dividing lines. But it took me a while to think of this, to realize that we just had Moshel a couple verses ago. Now it was in the last chapter, so again, that's why my brain didn't pick up on it right away. But we had Moshel just a couple verses ago, and that was here we go in verse number 17. It says, "Divrei chachamim benachat nishma'im." The words of the wise are heard softly. Mizakat Moshel baksilim, as opposed to the yelling of the controller and their control over the fools. Okay. In other words, we said over there that the way of these powerful, cynical leaders is to yell and scream, and that's how they keep people's attention. And he was saying how, unfortunately, the wise people don't do that. They don't go that direction. They don't try to convince people based on volume. They convince people with the substance of their claims. But unfortunately, the nature is, this is what we were saying, is that the nature of the powerful, the nature of the other force is to overcome it with volume. Okay? So whereas the wise can calmly and easily express their ideas, they run up against the problem that there's volume for the other side. The other side is louder and overwhelms them. Okay, so there's two things in this verse that I thought was interesting. Number one is, here's our Moshel. Okay, we have not had a lot of Moshel in the past couple chapters. Right? Moshel again is a powerful ruler, a ruler who rules based on a forceful ruler. But then there's another thing in this verse that's similar to ours, and that's this word, nachat. Nachat is very similar to nach, tanach, and yaniach that we had in our verse. It's the same essential root word. Now, it is used in a different sense over here. Here it means silence or quiet or calm, but here's our word. So it's almost as though King Solomon's telling us, look back, where was the last time I mentioned Moshel? Yeah, it was chapter 9, verse 17. You also see the translation for our other word over there, nachat. Let's try and plug that back into our verse, okay? So, first of all, that gives a little more context on what the Moshel is doing over here. Why do we have the word ruach as wind? Well, wind, particularly in a Tanakh sense, you often find wind being this forceful, powerful movement. We find that Elijah, when he has one of his visions, he sees this chaotic presence of God, or actually it wasn't God, as it comes out in the verses over there. And there was a ruach, there was this blowing wind that stirred up everything. Okay, so a ruach in that sense would be not just a wind, not a calm breeze, but a forceful, gale force wind. In which case, it fits very well with our Moshel. We had him yelling, and the last time he was mentioned, he was yelling. And over here, he's got this force, this gale force wind behind him. The imagery is very similar, right? If the loud volume, if this chaotic, presence of the Moshel comes up against you, okay, so now we've translated what the word ruach means, why that's the right word over here, because that's exactly what the Moshel is invoking. He's invoking this powerful force. He's using this volume against you. If it happens that the powerful come up and they're yelling at you, okay, meaning again, you're the student of the wise, right? That's why you're here. That's why you're reading the book, right? You're interested in wisdom. So if it comes up against you, Mikomcha, your place, al Tanakh, should not be, it's not leave, it's not place, it's not settle down. If we're using the same word nach as we had earlier, nachat, well, then it's in your place, you should not be silent. Okay? If we learned that nachat was silent or calm, then he's actually telling us something else over here. It's not necessarily that your place you should not leave. You should not leave your post. It would actually almost seem to mean that he's saying you should not be silent in your place. So again, if the strong ruler comes up against you, don't be silent. Don't sit there and not take and take it. In fact, it seems to be saying that it's the exact opposite. You shouldn't just stand there. You should actually be proactive against it. You should not be silent in that sense. So whereas it is the nature of a wise person to let the wisdom speak for itself and to not get up into it, here we have King Solomon telling us, but, and this is a big caveat, if it's coming up against you with such tremendous force, there's a time to no longer be silent. If we take the word nach to mean silence or calmness, as we had before, that seems to be what he's saying. In your place, you should not be silent. Okay, let's keep reading. Ki marpe yaniach chataim gedolim. Because it has the power of healing. Ki marpe, because this has the power of healing. Right? Again, Rafa. While there are commentaries that learn it as different as though it's written with a hey, it is. I don't see how that's possible. The aleph is clearly written in the verse over here, and would seem to indicate that we are saying that it is a healing presence. So if you're not going to be silent, that will heal things, and in fact, yaniyach chata'im gedolim, that will actually silence these great sins. Okay. So let's read that all together and see if that makes sense. If the wind, if the chaotic presence or the chaotic force of this controller comes up against you, do not be silent in your place. Ki marpe, rather, or instead, create healing, which will silence great sins. Okay. Another interesting thing is we've had chotei recently also. The last verse in the last chapter was that that one sinner, which we're saying is referring to the cynic, one cynical sinner is going to make us lose a lot of good. Well, again, we have chataim gedolim, great sins. Okay, so it seems to be that he's saying, if I were to read this verse again after going through this verse over and over again in my head, the only way I could really, if I'm seeing what I'm seeing over here, which is hints to a verse in the last chapter, if these are actually hints to recall something we just said, then what it's saying is that if this powerful force, if you get stuck in a yelling match between you and the powerful force, this non-chachma, unwise force comes up against you and uses its scare tactic of volume, of using just force, wind up against you, then yes, in one sense, don't leave your post, but in the other sense, don't be silent in your place, right? Don't just stand there silently. Rather, use your power to silence them. Use your power, your healing power, to silence the great sinners, or the great sins, right? The great mistakes that are being done over here. Meaning that although he's been lamenting the fact that the wise person always ends up with the lower hand on the argument, right? The nature of the world is that wisdom takes a backseat. Okay, the other forces, they usually get silenced by volume of the other of the bad side, if you will. You do have a job as a wise person to stand up for what's right, to stand up for wisdom, and that means not being silent in the face of it, in the face of somebody who's just trying to get people to sway people away from wisdom, let's say to cynicism. Okay, our job is actually not to stand there silently, but rather to speak up. Okay, that seems to be what he's saying to me. The support that I would say for this is we've had a bunch of verses that have been talking in third person. The wise person, the cynic, it's the wise speak calmly. So here we have a direct, what we call in Hebrew the nochach. He's speaking to you, right? And again, he's done that a number of times in the book, and it also always seems to be that whenever he does that, he's saying this is a takeaway for you to apply in your own life. Okay, when it comes up against you, ta'ale alecha, when it comes up against you, in your place, you should not be silent. Okay, so it seems to be a command, so to speak, a command to us to do something. So that would support this idea that there's an action that we're supposed to do. Again, I don't mind the translation of Makom Chal Tanakh being don't leave your post. I think that's correct too. Don't give in when it comes up against you. But I think there's a specific use of the word yanach, tanach over here, and yaniach over here as silence. You should not be silent. You should silence them. You should silence the other forces. Now, that's a shift. We've seen that he's said that the wise usually let wisdom speak for itself, which is not wrong. I would say that this is kind of the extreme case. This doesn't really happen so often, that it's so powerful that there's this gusting wind, this gale force wind up against a person of anti-chachma, of anti-wisdom. That's a rare case, a rare situation. So I think this is almost a in case of emergency break glass situation. He doesn't usually say this. Usually the wise person's always supposed to stay above the fight, to let the wisdom speak for itself, to always be there and to fight the cynicism from kind of a more calm position. But there are times, I think is what it's saying, there are times that when everything is just so crazy, everything is so powerful, this negative force, that you actually have to stand up and no longer be silent. Okay, so don't be nachat nishma'im, as we had in the verse before. Don't just rely on wisdom to speak for itself. Sometimes you need to speak for it. Okay, that's kind of how I'm learning this verse. Again, you can see that this verse is a very difficult verse to translate, and the fact that there is very little consensus amongst the translators just goes to show that everyone kind of struggles with figuring out what this verse is saying. But I think that these are hints over here. The use of the word moshel and the return to the nach shoresh, to the nach root, I think that's indicating this idea that a person should not be silent in the face of a very powerful ruler who is using their position to present some sort of wrong idea. That instead, no, that when the face of what's wrong, a person that's anti-wisdom, person should be willing to stand up and speak their mind. Obviously that's going to need a lot of, you want to kind of measure when it's the right appropriate place for that. Unfortunately, we live in a time where every situation, every day there's another news story where people are getting up and saying this is the worst thing that's happened in all of history. there's a lot of sky is falling going on for the past couple years. We've faced some very new and strange challenges, but we can't have this mentality every day. I think that's almost hinted more than anything as in this. The first word is im, is if this happens. It doesn't even necessarily have to ever happen. It's a very rare case, but if it happens, know that you have this, that you can speak up. You don't have to just be cowed. You can actually speak up if the time is right. But again, I do think it's important to always be wary of claims that this is the worst or this is the most difficult. Or okay, yes, there are challenges that come up and some interesting things that happen. Again, we've seen quite a few in the past few years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that that's what we're talking about. This is a very extreme case, is what I'm picking up on. Okay. Otherwise, if you're always yelling, if you're always speaking up and yelling at everything, then you're doing the same thing as they are. Then you're just using volume. So what did I see? I just saw a story of one of the big rabbis in Israel a number of years ago, and it said that this was a story that I saw from. This is the rabbi is Rabbi Mordechai Eliyahu. He was the Sephardic chief rabbi, and one of his drivers was saying that he would never yell at somebody if they did something wrong. He didn't even have to say anything. If the person did something wrong, all it took was meeting eyes, and you already knew that you needed to fix up what you were doing. Usually the words aren't necessary, And in fact, I was just also reading an academic research article that said that for adolescents, I mean, you don't really need a research article to say this, but it was proven through research, through scientific method, that for teenagers, one of the best methods of altering or managing their behavior is using disappointment, as opposed to forceful punishment or anything like that. Just letting them know that you're disappointed in them. That's a much powerful tool, can be a much more powerful tool than yelling, screaming, getting your blood up and all that. So it's a very powerful thing. Oh, the wise person knows how to use that instead. But again, there's a rare case where we won't be silent. The wise person will also utilize the power of volume. Okay, basically know that it's not off limits. All right, that is the end of this idea, but it segues very well and bridges directly to the next idea, and that is verse number 5. Now, this is interesting. The verse number 5 is just an intro. It does not actually present the issue. It just says there is an issue, which we'll get to in the coming verses. All right, but this is just an introductory verse. You could tell it's a new concept just because of the wording of the verse over here. It says, Yesh ra'ah, there is a wicked thing, there is an evil thing. Ra'iti, that I have seen, tachat hashamesh, under the sun. And this is a very strange phrase. Kishgaga shiyotzei milifnei hashalit, like a mistake that comes out from the one in control. We've said this many times, shalit, shen lamed tet, is a control. In fact, in Hebrew, shalat is a remote control, like for your television, right? So a shalat is a remote control. In Arabic, you've heard the phrase Arabic word sultan as the sultan, right? So it's the same word, basically, the Arabic. All right, so shalit is control. We had this a number of times so far. So again, yeshra, there is something wicked, re'iti tachat hashamesh, that I've seen under the sun, kishgagash yotzei lifnei hashalit, like a mistake that has come from before the controller, right? There's a different form of controller, by the way, not the controller we had in the last verse. That was a moshel, a forceful ruler. Shalit is just somebody who's actually appointed in control of things. And I think there's an interesting verse over here because, first of all, the sages use this phrase a lot, like a mistake that came from before the controller. They use it to refer to cases where somebody, we would say in English, jinxes something, okay? There's kind of a concept, it's weird to place in the Jewish theology. But there is kind of a concept of you don't want to say bad things. You don't want to, we always say God forbid or chas v'shalom, right? Chas v'chalilah. We have all sorts of phrases to say b'li ayin hara. We don't want to use ayin hara, right? These are some of them are kind of folky, Jewish folklore, but they seem to have some sort of at least rabbinic source. So in the tradition of the rabbinic sources, there's some sort of thing to this. I don't have enough. Again, another thing that I don't have, two things in one night. I don't have enough knowledge to talk about. Is how strongly is this concept in Judaism played out? We don't like to talk about certain things, right? And so there's a number of times in the stories of the sages that are mentioned in the Talmud where it says that so and so mentioned, it would be terrible if so and so were to die in a flood, and the Gemara says, and it was kishgagash yotzem lifnei shalit, like a mistake that comes from the controller, and the person died in a flood, right? In other words, it's a way of saying that they jinxed it, as we would say in English. So it's interesting that the phrase kind of caught on just in Talmudic times, at least, as a way of saying that, it was the wrong thing to say because it caused it to happen. So that's its own interesting thing to get into that I don't have enough to talk about. I don't have enough information to talk about that. But here it seems to be used in a bit of a different point. And it's almost, I find this very interesting because I'll spoil it, if you will. The coming verses are going to be talking about cases where people who should, for all intents and purposes, are good people, and they are getting something that's bad, or they're in a position that's lower. And you have bad people that seem to be not good people, who are occupying places that are good. Okay, what we often refer to as good things happening to bad people and bad things happening to good people. A book like Kohelet can't avoid that topic forever. He's gotten 10 chapters through, and the topic is finally coming up. It is the most difficult issue in any religion across the world, right? Every religion has to face this at some point or another. Why do bad things happen to good people or good things happen to bad people? It's the question that's thrown more people off the track of service of God than any other question, right? Many people came out of the Holocaust and asked this question, right? I knew good people who, they never did anything wrong in their lives. Unfortunately, they were the ones that got killed, and there were plenty of other people who were not good, and they were the ones who survived, or they were the ones who were perpetrating it, or, it's a difficult question. You can't get around that, if you believe in karma, you run into the question also. If you believe, again, every religion faces this question. King Solomon is going to talk about that. I don't know if he's going to give an answer, a satisfying answer. But I think there's one thing that we need to take away from it, is that he's going to talk about it. He's going to address it. He's going to basically address the elephant in the room. I think that itself speaks of something. The way of a wise person is not to avoid a topic because they don't want to get into it. Instead, they're going to look into the topic and go through it. Again, will he come out with a satisfying answer? I don't know. We'll probably see that in the coming weeks. But he's going to at least discuss it. He does give it this title. He says it's like a mistake that came from the controller. He almost doesn't want to call God by name in this case. He doesn't say God. He says the controller. In Yiddish, we would say the Bashefer, or the Eibishter, right? That's the creator, the controller, the one in charge of the world. It's the one thing that if you were to say anything was a mistake, which it's not. God doesn't make mistakes. That's a pretty solid Jewish concept. But if you were to say that anything seems to be a mistake, it would be this, right? Again, it's not. Kishgaga, it's like a mistake. It's not vihushgaga, that it is a mistake. It is kishgaga. It would seem to me, he says, it would seem to us downstairs that this is a mistake that comes from the controller. Again, the controller. We know, we can assume, I can presume we know who that's referring to. All right. So if there's any one thing that he refers to as ra'ah, it's bad. I've seen it under the sun. It would appear to us to be a shkagash yotzei milifnei hashalit, is this concept. Again, I just find that to be interesting that he's willing. I think the lesson more than anything else, again, is that he's going to take the question. My father of blessed memory, was raised Irish Catholic. He came to Judaism later in life. That's where O'Connor comes from. So he and he was always disturbed as a little kid. He can never deal with the fact that they would not answer his question. They wouldn't take his questions. The nuns were always there. That was back in the days when they used the metal rulers, to give their punishments, right? So he received a lot of that because you weren't allowed to ask questions. We're okay with questions. The wise person is okay with questions. And we might not even have a satisfying answer, but we're going to address the question. That's okay. All right. We're going to call it what it is. We're going to say that to us, this appears to be, unjust or something. That's fine. We can say that and address it, but it doesn't mean that it's not there. We can't just ignore it. So let's get into just the first one. We've got 2 more minutes here, and I just want to translate the first verse. That way we see it in action already. It says, Nitan hasechel bamromim rabim. The fool has been placed in many high places. Va'ashirim b'shefel yeshevu, while the wealthy sit or dwell in lowliness. Okay? Nitan hasechel bimromim rabim. The fools have been placed in many high places. Va'ashirim b'shefel yeshevu, while the wealthy live down in the lowly places. Okay, so we have this contrast. We've got high up places and we've got lowly places. We have the fool versus the rich person. That is interesting why he chooses the rich person over here. I think he wants to start us off with a case that's not spiritual. It's so physical. In our minds, we see a rich person. A rich person, a wealthy person, usually means power. It usually the wealth equals power very often, usually. Kind of in the way of the world, that's how it works out. But you see plenty of times where a wealthy person has no power. They live downstairs, down in the muck. They don't have anything to them. They're lowly. They have a bad reputation, or things are piled all over them, and we've seen this. We see this occasionally. And then you have the opposite, which is the fool, who seems to be controlling everything, who seems to be all up on top. Not just a single case in one, not just a rare example of this happening. Rabim, this happens all over the place, right? That fools are up top, and the wealthy, who by their nature should basically be powerful, are not. They're down and below. So you have these contrasts where, again, I think he wants to give us this very physical, non-spiritual case first, of a case where it's just like, this doesn't make sense. Why would a fool occupy this high place and a wealthy person who knows what to get their money occupy this low place? There's something out of whack over here. So I think that's just our first case over there. There's a bunch. He's going to give us a whole list of examples. It'll probably take us maybe even a week or two just to get through all the examples that he's going to give us of this. So kind of fasten your seatbelts a little bit, because he's gonna take a little time to really draw the picture, and then maybe he'll get to an answer, maybe he won't. Again, the way of the wise person is not to avoid the question, but is rather to take the question on. So hope that is good. We have to stop here. Let's go to their main screen. Thank you for joining us. I appreciate you coming, and God willing, we should see you next week.